I have the pleasure of talking with Professor Heide Imai, based in Tokyo, and she is doing a variety of research projects and interviews with local people talking about backstreets and alleyways, one of my favorite ways to discover a new city anywhere in the world, but especially in Japan. So I'm so excited to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining, Heidi.
Thank you much for the invitation.
It's great to have you here. I don't think we will have enough time to talk about all your research. You've written a number of books, a number of wonderful articles. Hopefully we can get the conversation started and then have you back again in the future for the next conversation. Is that all right?
That would be perfect.
Wonderful. Can you give us a little self-introduction before we start?
Yes. So originally I'm trained architect, have practiced several years in different countries. And then I thought, okay, something is missing. I think more input, academic or not, is there. So I was searching for some kind of, perspective to come from other side. So I joined, I think, Oxford Brookes University for cultural studies. And I discovered that there are so many cultural aspects of cities which are really interesting, but I don't know much about. And of course, traveling, my other huge passion, brought me to Japan. I started to learn Japanese. And then, of course, discovering Japanese cities, including my first place was Kyoto and then Tokyo later. That what is that secret between that gap spaces and that really traditional small scale versus this large scale and modernity. And that was so fascinating, kind of lost in translation, learning the language, that I really thought there's so much to see that my curiosity was sparked to really go deeper. And I'm still here. I'm doing that 15 years later. I still do that. So it's expanded from, let's say, that leftover spaces, ROJIs, the alleyways, into much more sustainable thinking of how to preserve vernacular spaces. And I think that's very important because Japan has kind of taken over that American approach of urban planning, that everything should be plannable and, rigid in size. So I think some really local wisdom is already lost. So what can we preserve? How can we preserve it?
Yeah. It's so important to think about these questions. And like we said before we started, to also communicate with local people. And one of the things that I really love about your research is all the interviews that you're doing with local people and following over time when there is a revitalization project in place. How do they feel about it going in? How do they feel about it over time? These are studies that there's just not enough of, and we need more so that we can apply these best practices to other parts of Japan or even Asia or even the world, right?
Yes, I think the biggest problem is that you implement something and make a plan for them, whether they like it or they ask for it. Anyways, plans are happening, and then often communities don't follow up. Was it a success or was it a failure? And what does it mean? Failure is also acceptable, but maybe we shouldn't repeat failures or accept it as also a part of a result and just say, okay, here maybe DIY architecture is a better approach. Yeah, so people by themselves start to create something. And I think you have two interesting pictures here. I mean, the one is on the bottom, maybe just to explain that to some people, are bigger institutions of creativity, which are, trying to use leftover rooms. These are two schools at the top. The other is also underground space at the train station. And I think very practical, of course, Taitakus can say we don't need much rent. So rents are very reasonable versus the other places which are extremely expensive in asking maybe almost the triple of rent for artists. So yes, it is a good approach to use this abandoned places, which is a huge problem also in Tokyo. But it is also a problem of overcharging and commodifying that whole area. So saying, okay, people come and they buy and they pay for workshop, but the artists still don't get much of that profit. And this other picture you have here is quite interesting. It's always stunning. I mean, just walking around, what I always recommend, walk around the city and you discover so many little things. Is a typical laundry and then espresso shop next to it. So it's I don't want to say gentrification en vogue, but it is a kind of thing where you can say this is also a lifestyle thing. So I think in Hamamatsu in Shizuoka you have very fashionable laundry centers where people can meet. So why don't you make it a bit bigger and have people doing their homework there and have a gakudo? So these ideas are great, how to connect community needs and have people meet with each other. I mean, community spaces, whether indoor or outdoor, often people say, where are the parks? But I think in big cities in Japan, it is not about that, but it is really much about life was always spent outside, in the community. So the apartments have been small. That is the kind of way of life. And I hope that we can turn back to more community spaces which are affordable. Yes, for artists who are providers, but they are also consumers. So you can't really, just milk the money out of them. So I feel bad for, if you look at cases like Koenji or something, that subculture is used as hijacked by developers to, just make it hip spaces and then they move on. So that's a big problem, I think, everywhere.
Yeah, you have a great discussion in a lot of your writing and your articles talking about commodification. From the tourism perspective, do we commodify this part of Japanese heritage? How do we find the balance for local people to have a better quality of life, to get some income, but make it more enjoyable? One of the places you mentioned had some great balancing effects in place in terms of policy. So, for example, they had park and ride, or they had pedestrianized zones, or they had certain infrastructure upgrades that the locals wanted. I think that was Kawagoe, maybe?
Yeah, that was, It's quite a while ago that I did Kawagoe, but this was when the boom of Asadora dramas on TV, there was a huge influx of tourists. And I think that was just beginning of that 10 years, 10 years of tourist boom before pre-pandemic. And I think interesting is here that you can adjust to the local needs. And that is very important to consider because over touristification or, this is also what happened, of course, in the aftermath, that many places have been totally overrun in the last years by just too many tourists. But I think Kyoto has the problem now, a similar problem, that they try to, use tourism as one of the sources of income. But the question is, of course, how can you then keep the balance? So like I said before, where can you say that's enough? Kawagoe is the same thing. We want to preserve that old houses, which they have done fantastically. But I think the problem then is also that the prices are going up and locals are pushed out, and it is just about, let's say, tapioca, tea, and all that fashionable things. So is that still original? And I think originality and, of course, just copying that originality is a big problem everywhere. So, just pretending that this is real or keeping a museum and open-air museum alive where people say, I don't live there anymore, I can't afford that anymore, is a big, of course, worldwide problem. So heritage, preserving heritage, which I think is also a totally unique approach in itself in Japan, and how to really keep it up to date. It's not about preserving the life 100 years ago, but I think often, as Alex Kerr says, just bring it back to our modern times and make it usable, make it attractive, but don't keep it in a bubble. And tourists always think that's how it was. But come on, we know that life, they have to make a living, and no, not everybody goes to Starbucks. They also need a tofu shop and all the local needs. So if the elderly need benches and pedestrian areas and I think local affordable supermarkets, for example, then you should consider the needs of different people and implement them. Otherwise, I think people just move out and you have a hollow area there. I think it's what you see, for example, very vividly in Tokyo, that Marunouchi is such a, no, I mean, at night it's just empty because everybody, especially I think with Corona, working people are going or leaving. And everything else until up to the horses which are, passing by, this hasn't, I mean, this is just not, I mean, this is reintroduced as a tourist event, but that's not real. Yeah. And even the brickstones are all new. So pretending that this is history, and yes, it's important, but can we find other ways to keep memories alive instead of visible and physical attractions? I mean, make events, make community events, make workshops, acknowledge that wisdom in inviting people to take part. But I don't think it's always about that we have to have that museum or that heritage thing. So that balance is very difficult. I think Kawagoe has done well in preserving that small area, but the other area around is, I mean, it's also affected by declining population. So, I mean, the need of having one attraction, yes, but what problems does it solve? So it's really difficult to not just say, okay, tourism, we have income, but who is profiting from that? And if it's not the locals, let's say maybe just 20%, then I think that's a sad situation.
You talk about, and this is something you just mentioned as well, is having something with unique appeal, right? So not just doing a cookie cutter approach for every town that has success. Okay, let's take that exact model and try it in this town. But learning what your town has, which is a unique feature, and kind of capitalizing on that part to create like tourism buzz, or to bring the television crews in and cover that. And then that brings more people who want to eat that unique dish or try that unique place or go to that unique house. But talking to local people, finding out what they need, getting that up to a certain higher quality of living, and finding ways for them to get income and making it a thriving village, not just an empty tourist town, I think is such an interesting and important discussion. Like you just said, how many small villages do I visit? And I love the aesthetic, but no one is living there anymore. It is only a tourist town, and it feels hollow and empty. But if I visit somewhere that's not a typical tourist town, but people are living there, people are using the back alleys to play or to hang their laundry, you have that immediate warmth feeling as even a visitor, right?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, this is like, I had the chance in, I think in February, we went to Yusuhara in Kochi Prefecture, where, I mean, question yourself, okay, who was there first is often the question. Is it the architect who, Kengo Kuma is the famous architect who designed a lot of buildings there. And what is that origin? And we talk to the locals, this is what we always kind of do, finding the real, whether they like it, whether they're happy with it, do they use it? And they said, no, that was way before Kengo Kuma was famous, and he either was friend with the mayor, or anyway, he was recommended, and he was so young and I guess not famous at all, 1993 or something, and he was asked to design the first building there. And then it took over to, a rich community, which is also the case. So what preconditions do we have? But they promote their original wood, which is very rare and unique feature, like we said. And the thing is, because of the library and the city hall, and yes, the hotels which have been designed there, and not 10 hotels, but there are just 2 small hotels, and there have been a huge influx of young people and young families who look for, I guess, just the right combination of, there is a high school, there's a kindergarten, maybe even free, I guess. There is everything you need. You don't need a car. We can be sustainable. We can zero waste, whatever, and we can try out. Yeah, so nobody is, oh no, we don't need that young people and rice farmers. No, we don't need modern technology. No, they're open. And of course, now you can say, okay, let's do that everywhere. It will not work. But here you have to talk also about disaster and resilience. I mean, a place which was growing over 30 years, and at the right moment after the fall of the bubble, invested into something where everybody said, we don't have money, we can't invest. And they have a unique thing that they're independent of tourism. I mean, yes, there have been architecture tourists, but right then when we went, there was nobody. I mean, it's just like 3 couples taking pictures of that. And it will be, I think, demolished in September and then rebuilt. I'm not sure how big, but having the right size of facility and not so, like, I think Suloga, you have that case, Shigeru Ban's project, which has 350 rooms. And it's just so big that I think whatever flagship architecture, as we call it, there's a Sana cultural hall, the city is empty. The city is empty. And let's say think tanks of Keio University and that Sweden Terrace and that Sana project, yeah, so what? That doesn't interest locals. So it isn't that, I mean, can I just say we fail and that's also sustainable? So we shrink and basically this village will disappear eventually, which I think we should accept. We can't keep everything alive. Or if we maintain our life, then do we just have one leg as tourism, or do we sustain by ourselves as we know it from Detroit or other places, gardening and I don't know what, but make free hoikens and have couples come there if they can work remote whatsoever, but don't just copy and either do it by yourself or have an academic institution, which is often also found in some local places, or have a very famous architect if you think that helps you, but don't just cookie cutter say that's the only approach and let's make that white big elephant and then we have a museum which we can't afford. I mean, this is what you often see. You think, wow, a big, beautiful architecture, but meaningful? I mean, yeah, I think Go Hasegawa architect has done an Airbnb, I think 5 years ago at the House Vision exhibition, which he then transferred somewhere to Nara, Wakayama, I'm now not sure where that was. And now it's rented. So it's one single house, which is sustainable, kept by the local housewives, cooking, and this one. And Echigo, Triennale, you have, I think, 10 or 15 houses. Don't blow it up. Keep a sustainable size because this is more resilient against, let's say, disaster. So I think size-wise, human scale, human interaction, and also getting through bad times without failing totally. That's, I think, this community support, I think is what people don't consider, that how many stakeholders, how many people are involved. And if you don't discuss and consider, then I think you're missing the point, yeah.
Combination, I think diversity and innovation, creativity, art, bringing in young people with new ideas into traditional areas. It's all important to have this discussion, especially with the aging population in Japan, the decline of workers, right? You don't want to have these beautiful communities full of only retired folk who aren't interested in catering to visitors, because then no income will stay in the economy because nobody's selling anything or providing any services. So you need that balance of young people doing businesses with innovation and bringing new people in, as well as the traditional tourists, right? I love this example here in West Tokyo. So colorful and vibrant, right next to traditional suburbs. Is that right?
Exactly. I mean, Koenji is a good example because Koenji is, I think, has been very subcultural and anti-movement since the 1960s. But the city, of course, also discovered, okay, we can also commodify that. So coming back to commodification, if you put an art hotel where the artists design a room for people, then of course you're making use of their service. But the question is, if you then have a mural and a museum and big festivals, which of course are featured on TV, whether that's a good thing for the community. And yes, they want to be another, I don't know, Silicon Valley or anyway, famous for something. But I think having just the tourists staying in that area, being able to pay rent, having ateliers there, providing services to the community, I think that balance should be kept. So it's not just about manga and anime, popular culture. And climbing up to that, can you keep that development somewhere? Or is it basically then going off that people say, okay, now there's a mansion coming and it is already too late? And I think this is what you see, for example, in Musashi Koyama. This is also Tokyo. This is a bit south Tokyo, where basically beautiful drinking places, small alleyways, have been totally erased. So I took pictures there before it just was erased. A whole corner of yakitori, tofu places where, yes, maybe more men drink than women, but even for women, there might be more drinking places. But now it is, tower mansion. I mean, this is just like erased, artificial, nothing really there, which is, let's say, catering to maybe just the open community, which, is not just, let's say, the chain of, burgers or something. So that is really problematic. And you have another example here. I think Kyojima maybe is that really hopeful case. So I say, Koenji, I really fear that this is just going in a negative direction. Let's see. But Kyojima is next to Higifune, which is northeast Tokyo. And it's surprisingly colorful how the community, very not accessible, very dense, no major, you have to walk to the station, it's 2 kilometers. But they said, look, we have these empty shops, so just let's rent them. New people are interested in, let's say, tea shops and kendama shops, and people use it for gakudos to entertain the kids of the community. And young people live there, and really, really, I think, amazing how you can make exhibitions with local wisdom and local interest. And if that stays, that's the thing. If nobody really says, let's develop that, because there is no place. You would have to cut that down, but there is no really big property there. Then this small scale community where basically people walk out in their pajamas, and yes, they are old and they walk just over to get some tofu, but there is no, the kind of, hesitation level is not that high, because that's how Shitamachi and the back alley culture was. So, this is what you have in Kyoto and in Osaka, and the Ichibata Kaigi, that people just talk to each other. They don't have any hesitation. But this is what I think young people really struggle. They struggle to just say hello and, get together with people of all kind of backgrounds, whether homeless or single mother, and all kind of things. And I think I have written, last year, a chapter in a book about poverty in Singapore. That is a huge problem, because these invisible groups, minority groups, whatever background they come from, they really struggle to be visible in a big city, especially at Tokyo, when you compare that, because they have no place to go. The places will just always either demand you to buy ice cream in the shopping mall. But where is that? You don't need anything to prove access for everybody. Public spaces open for everybody. And the POPs, as we know them, the privately owned public places where nothing is allowed, so no soccer, no sitting around, no drinking alcohol, are just increasing dramatically. And so kids are either in school or in juku, and what kids, they are urusai, they are noisy, but that's normal life. And if you can't stand that, I think then something is really wrong.
I wanted to ask you, how do you choose where to do your research? Because you have so many interesting areas that you bring up. For example, you did a big map here, 5 different areas kind of outside of central Tokyo or in pockets of Tokyo. How do you find the areas that you want to study?
That's often, as researchers, I think when I really started my first research project in 2007, I started to live in Yanaka, which is famous for its Machizukuri approach. So the leader, there are academic people, but there's also, of course, Mole Mayumi at the time, local newspaper. It was famous, it was recommended, but anyway, it was famous for its Machizukuri approach. I think 1991, they started to say, okay, young mothers are, they need our support here. They are all there, so let's get together. And they all got together on the street, and they played with their kids. And as they got older, of course, there was more demand for, other things which the community needed. And they have been always active in publishing their results. Amazing. So why is their Machizukuri succeeding if others have the same choice? And this is maybe for the non-urban planner, this is always a question which comes back. How is it possible that everything is so centralized and the same? It's not. So since the 1980s, communities have the choice of district planning law to say, okay, here we have something to preserve, or we have a reason to follow a different approach. So let's do that. And if locals decide, of course, you need knowledge, but you have craftsmen as well as academic who are really volunteering to improve, preserve, whatsoever. Yeah, so preserve knowledge. Then these people get together, and of course, then the question is, does it go, over to the next generation automatically? Not. I know that Yanaka is also, in my understanding, just have been over touristified in the last years. I don't know currently, because Corona obviously has stopped that development, but it was so fashionable with vernacular ryokans, which kind of want to pretend it's all open, yes, and we all speak English, and we include your onsen visit in the tour, and yes, nice, but a bit over the top represented as the only thing. And I think so many other places have the same appeal. So why just focus on one place and just promote that as a ultimum of your visit? So, I mean, we have Asakusa, which has a very strong traditional approach, but you have so many Iliya around the corner that I think it is not just there where they speak English, and it doesn't matter whether you speak Japanese, but please don't just go to that hip and architecture aesthetic places, but really, really run down, or let's say just very normally chaotic. It's known as afure dashi, the overflow of public, private, objects into it, and that is in a chaos. Some people say it, but it is also the charm of things. So I think Yanaka, it became kind of cleaned up. I think, anyway, well organized. What is okay, what is not okay. Too many rules for my liking. But there are still enough areas nearby who could follow that, say we want to preserve our local Machizukuri, Matsuri, whatsoever. Because you see, for example, the case of Kagurazaka, which is really downtown Tokyo. They had a very strong movement in the, I think, 80s to preserve that street and not allow cars to enter that street, and have, I think, every day from 12 o'clock, or anyway, on the weekends, they are closed for traffic. But then I said, so what's the next project? Oh, actually, we are done. So what else is there has to be done? And they have lost that stamina to fight for other things. For example, there was a huge tower constructed. The land was owned by the local temple, and they basically have sold it to the developer. So if there is no discussion of we need this, and yes, you should also listen to our needs, and yes, seeing money as that huge advantage, I think then this is a sad story. Yeah? I mean, this is like prices are incredibly high. There's a typical, I would say, expat paradise. At least it's always people think people live there, but in the kind of proportion, you see that not so many people live there. They just want to live nearby because it's so famous. So attraction of a landmark, and yes, who then can afford it, and local shops are replaced by chains and 100 yen stores. And I think who is really willing then to voice their concerns, the absence of community and the non-participation, versus, of course, people who really argue and say, this is our wish. And I think we have Kotoku there. Also, this is not on the picture, but this is a bit south of Hikifune, which basically has, at least when the movement started, asked people, so what should we do with our local warehouses? Who wants to use them? So galleries moved in. But then, of course, you had that huge coffee boom in the last 10 years. Blue coffee, is the most famous. And yes, they use old houses. But the question is, okay, I have 600, 700 yen for a flat white. But it is very much elite, I would say. I don't see many locals going there. And the most people you see taking pictures there or coming from very far, Taiwan, China, as if they, at that time, I was like, really, okay, really locals like this. And yes, then you have that kind of, front facade, and in the back you have local people doing the same, but in a much more niche, hidden perspective. Locals, bakeries who say, yes, we are not so famous, we can't afford that big heritage renovation project, but we still have an advantage. So yes, some people say it's not good, it just brings, prices up, but it also brought new young people into that area. Craftsmanship, entrepreneurship, innovation, and it's amazing. I mean, this is like to see yoga studios and bicycle and craft beer and even a winery. Recently, that I hear that a winery opened, and I'm just like, okay, winery in Tokyo, that's a new thing to me. So, of course, who can afford it? Who has the salary? But I think it shows if I live in Tokyo and I'm allowed to enjoy, I mean, even then, this is an income which stays in the community. Why not? So I think rural places might not have all that options, but I think they still can go a route, which I think that was in Ishinomaki now, that they said, okay, how to use that rural fields farmers can't preserve. So they started to plant olive trees. And people say, how can it be possible? It's too cold. No, it's not too cold. So they have gotten the innovation and knowledge from, I think, Shotoshima. And they are at a very good target. I think last year, I don't know last year, but the year before, it's incredibly increasing. And why not have local olive oil? And if that stays in the community, I think that's a fantastic thing. So there is innovation.
Fantastic. I love the idea of preservation of a community's aesthetic. And I know as an architect, you must have a strong feeling about this as well. But if I visit the central Kurashiki area of Okayama, for example, or backstreet areas in some of these suburbs, like traditional suburbs in Tokyo, like this one, the Bangai street area, you have people who take over the old buildings and under rules or policies remodel in the traditional sense, but make a modern, comfortable home. But when the visitor or the local walks down, they still have that heritage atmosphere. And I think that's so important to preserve. You must see this in many examples around.
Oh yes, that was, but maybe that is thanks to a professor I had at university who was teaching preservation. I mean, as it was, I found this the most amazing. It's easy to start from nothing, but if you have something, and I think there was a 1-year course where we really had to find solutions, anyway, also analyze existing projects, but find solutions of how to incorporate existing meaning, but also the building. So, and of course you can put something on top, as you often see at the Kabuki theater in, I think in Tokyo, but you can also just add a tiny bit of an extension, which is respecting that old. Or you're using that inner structure and build a new roof to protect it, but you still have a house in a house. And I think that was amazing to see how much you can do. And we're talking about sustainability, and now we have a huge, I think we had a huge discussion. Yeah, now we are now doing a new project starting in September of how reusing, we call them material collector in German. I don't know whether that exists in English or Japanese, but basically preserving old beams, preserving old tatami, brick stones, whatever you have, if that is earthquake, of course, resistant, in an earthquake resistant structure at it, then you can, I think, have an amazing result in this kind of, kind of, how would you call that, patchwork you receive there is amazing. I mean, I'm not practicing anymore, but I always, we have a local thing. We always travel to places and discover new places where I say this amazing concept, and a local store, a museum, whatever their concept is really, really interesting. And even here in Tokyo, people always say, well, how do you discover it? Yeah, we just walk around, run around, cycle, and by car. But it is, if you look into it, there is so much you can use without, that throwaway society is just a very sad thing in Japan. And we know that this came since the 50s, but the motainai culture from Edo, had that really that clay walls, and you can basically use again clay to plaster them and use the windows inside. And yes, you can add air conditioning and you can add new flooring, but it is very important to say that of course, if you can't finance it, how can you support it? And there are more and more, and this is maybe the most important thing, young architects who go to Europe, especially I think Germany seems to be a good trend, and come back and really provide their knowledge. I think there's one architect, Molly Yumi, I forgot her, but she is really good. Also zero waste, passive houses, solar technology, which has been a major when I was 25 years when I was really graduating. That was our major. So now 25 years later, I think that should be affordable to so many people. So having that knowledge and practice, and also I see there are a lot of Facebook groups which share, here I have the giveaway of that roof tiles, and why don't we create this kind of lending and recycling and giving it away. So I think this is very important. And I think for Japanese, let's say mass community, mass society, I still miss that you can lend something. You don't always have to buy everything new. So why not give away food which you can't eat, and why not have that helping each other? And I think I hear a lot of movement of next door. You have no chance to get together, but maybe just ring the bell and ask for your neighbor for some eggs or something, and you will realize that you have much more things in common. So I think that is a kind of hesitation. I can't, I should do it by myself. I have to gammon. And I don't really like it, because I think Edoko, that was not like this. I think people really had to help each other. They relied on each other. Hazukashi, being shy, no need. I think especially pandemic-wise and salary-wise, and also who's watching my kids, you need the community. And if community is just artificially produced and, let's say, on paper existing, but in reality, people think, it's either too mentokusai, too demanding. Young people don't want to be rigidly told by the Shotengai how they have to cooperate. But so whose mistake, or where to start? I think both have to adjust, both sides. Young kids or young people should learn from early on. It's great to help in the community. It's a fantastic experience. But the existing rules set by Shotengais, Shonaikais, whatsoever, also need a fresh breath of life to say, okay, I think that was in Tokyo last year, we had that research that our members suffer the most, and they don't know who to ask, and they are lonely, and Corona, they are so scared, and then there are people using that even to get their money. So don't you think it's necessary to provide some kind of support? And that's the thing, you are able to walk, but if
and then that is the value of the traditional ROJI, right? The traditional alleyway, which you have written a book about, you've done so much research on. I love some of the quotes about the urban commons. Can you talk about urban commons and the alleyway feel or communication and heritage a little bit?
Also, I think, maybe introducing that concept of urban commons is for some people, they might know urban gardening, and people often think urban common means so everybody has a piece of land and they have the right to harvest as much as they want. But that's, yes, it's known as that, but it's not just that. So basically it is about a empty plot, or anyway, land which is available, not owned by anybody, and everybody has the right to come. But I often explain to the students that it's not a substantive, it's not a thing, it is something you do. It is urban commoning. If you don't do it, it means it will not exist. So go there, collect the rubbish, do the harvesting of the vegetables, set a basket in front of your house if you have too many lemons and other things, and really do that act of kindness and friendliness. And I think the ROJI had that. There is no, I sometimes thought, can I enter? But even once you enter, people are so happy to talk about their pot plants and about their animals and about their life, that you think like, okay, these people have a huge need to open up. And there is no there is no bound. There's no difference between us, whether language-wise or so. Whenever I conducted my research, I think most people have been most happy to talk about their life, and they open their photo albums and their life stories. And that's the thing. When you go back to it, I think it would be great if I can do this again. But this is what I do every year with students, to just go back to the places and revisit. But it's amazing that these people also, of course, remember you, and they appreciate that you also, of course, talk about them. So talking about that maybe smallest member of community and making that ROJI community. And I often ask people, so is it really that you want to live there and want to preserve that physical thing? And often people say, no, it's nice to visit, but I don't want to live there. But I think it is something, whether it is a ROJI or not, you can recreate it in all kind of form, indoor, outdoor, in a community building, in an elderly care, in a hoikuen. But that feeling of having covered different demands where you don't really have to pay much insurance money, not many fees, but provide your service, and the gratefulness comes back to you. Yeah, it's kind of bring what you have, and not a flea market, but I think just a place where everything is possible. And I think this is what I think that Stamachi was a lot about, that it doesn't really matter if you bring something, bring yourself, but be there and take part, open your heart, and tell your story if you want. But I think this warm feeling, this is what many people miss. And out of sadness, they, I don't know, prefer shopping or something nowadays.
It's that community, the community dynamic, right? It's like if you live in a small neighborhood in Japan and passing around the koban, is it? The community board, and everybody shares in cleaning day. I love this quote that you have from your article, talking about one of the community members who appreciates living there. I prefer to walk the alleys in the morning when everything is empty and quiet, and reminds me of my childhood days. Everything got so noisy that I long for a moment where I can just hide from my busy daily life. During the last few years, many old neighbors have died or moved away. And even if only close friends, I miss the spirit of the old community and don't understand the need for good communication between neighbors. They often pass by without saying a word. So talking about the losing that community heritage of the backstreet alleyways. And I found that so powerful and so telling for how culture is changing, but it's definitely important to hold on to these cultural aspects, right?
Yeah, I still remember her. That was a flower shop lady, and it was not about selling flowers. It was about drinking a tea with her and listening to what she had to say, or basically just maybe say nothing and just take a break. And it was like a jungle. So she inherited the house from her father. And it was not about making profit. Yeah, it looked fancy, and always people thought, wow, that's amazing. But it's just out of clutter and being not really visible, and having her own bubble and paradise. And yes, walking then the back streets, and we walked it together. That's what we often do. So we have first the interview and then we walk together. And this is amazing how people basically from very, I can't tell you the real truth. I can't tell you how I really feel. But eventually you just see them, my heart and my feelings, and this is the local onigiri shop, and this guy sells my rice, and yes, that is amazing. So I think having that kind of local wisdom you can't really see when you arrive, but you get to know the kind of rhythm of our life in the morning. And this is what I always try also to teach, that understanding a place from the architecture perspective is not just drawing it or knowing how it looks, but it is really the rhythm, day, night, week, festival, quiet, and understanding the difference. And also making sure that this is also kept alive. So if everything just becomes monocultural, monofunctional, then I think, like you said, the diversity is really going to die out. And I think that was Amos Rappaport who said it's maybe good to walk a street very fast, but if there are no turns and twists, you will be soon very bored. Yeah? So you have to keep that attention span and that fascination, which I think kids still have, alive in designing something playful, unexpected, and leaving place for possibilities.
Definitely. I love what you just said about turning the corner and finding something interesting. I think this is so important. And what we talked about before, don't use the generic, this worked in this place, so let's try it in our town. Find something unique for your area. I think it's so important. Talking about the ROJI conclusion that you had from your research, I'd love to read this. It's so interesting. And let me see if I can bring it up on screen bigger here so everybody can see it. The ROJI, as an integral part of everyday urban life, looks set to disappear from the urban landscape of Tokyo, leaving traces of the past to be covered by new modern urban developments, standing for the ongoing destruction and reconstruction of Tokyo and other places in the 21st century. Nevertheless, it continues to exist as imaginary, and in this sense continues to have a shared or social presence, being in the sense a mental space. The alleyway forms a boundary between the past and the present, and an alternative landscape of reminiscence. That's beautiful.
Yeah. I mean, this is, that's, the thing is, we have done, so this is quite a while ago, but that's the kind of essence. I still think, it's important. And when we did this project, we did a project in 7 countries with different people who are have done alleyway research. And I was luckily or unluckily the only one who compared 2 cases, Seoul and Tokyo. And it is even more global pressure, gentrification, commodification, that creative policy approach. We have to be competitive with other global cities. And I went to, some areas. I was lucky to go to some areas that you say, yes, Tokyo, it is maybe not as hard yet, not as, I think society is still very, very friendly in some ways. So there's a good chance to keep that. But there, people have been really, really, I don't know. It's a matter of culture, how you cope with that. And this kind of success versus failure, and you are not succeeding, so you are out of this. I was quite shocked that in Insadong in Seoul, for example, this is a hard thing that you are almost forced out. I mean, this is like, even so, you might be successful. After 2 years, independent shops are not wanted anymore because they know they can have more money if they have a fancy generic shop, which is basically offering the same. So the brush maker, the calligraphy teacher, young professionals are really forced out because, yes, they could afford it, but it is not, the branding of it, how to brand it is either old already. This is what you see sometimes in shopping malls in Japan, but we need something new. So after that tapioca trend or after that trend, we need that new trend. And I'm not sure why. And there was a small, alternative shopping center which had just local artists, but I thought this is still good. So there's you can have both, but why do you have to kick out some to then have artificial building? Look at Harajuku Station. This is just the worst. Yeah, we have another copy of what they say. Why can we not preserve that old building and have that as a monument for all times? No, we have to demolish it, and that's so sad that now you have a coffee roastery there, which is, yes, it's luckily maybe not a Starbucks, but I just think, but for me it looks the same. It is just that, okay, let's be a bit local looking. We are not as local. I mean, Starbucks often asks Kengakuma, but I don't think that helps me. It's fake for the people who say, oh, it looks good, it's local. No, it's not local. So that makes me sad that why it has to be so generic, a concept which you see everywhere else. I don't want to go there. For me, it's something, I go there once and it's nothing. Even the owners are not, they are not the owners. The people who work there change every 3 months because, they are just students. So I feel like you can, for example, and this is what has been successful, I think, in the post office west of the station, Tokyo Station, you can preserve buildings, and they can also have a new purpose if you just allow that a church, for example, in Europe, you often have a church can become a bouldering place, and temples also in Japan can become, I don't know what, hotels, ryokans. It don't has to be exactly that what it was 50 years ago if it's now empty. So just use it. But I think for communities, especially rural communities, they're often left alone. They are not, this is really, the government is like, yeah, here, get money for more concrete, but they are not offered any alternatives. And I think that's exactly what you need. Local leadership also stepping up and saying, I would do this. Yeah. And then, of course, people saying, okay, he's 40, doesn't matter. Or she is 40. Let's try it. There's nothing we can lose. And I think trusting, yes, change will happen anyway, but you can have a good change if you try something, maybe this kind of unknown route. And I think that's what most people are scared of. I think Japanese prefer to know what will happen ahead of them. And I think young people, especially when you ask them at university, so what you're doing now, you're a salaryman or whatever, but they soon realize that might be not what makes them happy. And if it's about happiness and not just money, they might look for alternatives, going locally, getting into farming. I don't know what, but there is no no concept for that. There's just try out and take a risk, and most people are very happy once they take the risk. And I think, nothing in life is just coming up to you. You have to search for it, I think.
That whole concept of balancing the young needs or the trends and the old tradition and the heritage, it seems like it can be, and it has been done at the same time in certain areas of Japan. So, for example, you have the Sky Tree, the new attraction, surrounded by very traditional old areas. So you've got the new shops, the big mass tourism going to Sky Tree, but you also have some money trickling down into the local heritage historical areas, because if people are interested in both, which we have a lot of tourists who like both, they can give some money to that local economy. The big attraction also feeds money into the local economy. A lot of mass tourists will just go to Skytree and go out, and that's fine too. So to have this kind of diversity of attraction for mass tourists or more meaningful, sustainable travel-seeking tourists, it's a really nice example of how you might be able to do both. But have you seen examples of this in other areas of Japan?
I think there's always, for example, Kyoto is quite famous for that. Demachiyanagi is a very interesting place. I lived there when I studied Japanese, and I think there is this whole attraction of Kyoto and the Gosho and all that. But you have local places, and they even have, we lived in a very local place, and they have the kebab and the Spanish inspired tapas bar run by a Japanese photographer. So I think but this was interesting because at that time there was no social media, so of course they had kuchikomi physically. But nowadays I see, and this is what I really hope going to grow a lot, is that if somebody is I recently followed somebody opening a French fried store, but anyway, very, very passionate and very Belgium perspective. And if you open an account on Instagram and have 400 subscribers before you open, wow. So I'm just like, and there are no tourists yet. So I'm just, maybe that is the chance in pandemic times, opening up, or even a farm opening a restaurant, and they have the farm outside of Tokyo, and they are opening up, and you could say, let's postpone, let's give up. No. And people come, and there is that thirst of new and meeting again. And yes, and the online was the only way for, I think, almost a year now. It's still, for some people, the only thing. And I'm happy to see that diversity spreading. And I donate. That's the thing. I think that searching for the local roots, and yes, Amazon is maybe still the main provider, but why not have both, as you say, at the same time? But I more and more went out to say, okay, where is that fabric from? where do I get my farmers' products from? So I get it sent every week, and I'm happy. It makes me happy. I can't leave the house, but that local grown food, which has still the dirt. I think what kept you alive over time, and the money kept them alive. So I think that transnational, and yes, money for academic or anyway who can afford it, but I think we are good examples. So other people follow the route that you can make your own vinegar. Why not? So this is something you teach the others, but you also help a community, a digital community, which I think is very, very strong. And 10 years ago, I didn't really saw that, but I think also in Kyoto nowadays, for some people, survival next to that master regional, I think they suffer the most now, because how do you cover it if you have a huge facility which is 50-70% empty or small, which suffers, but they can sell online and have takeout and have Kickstarter events and donating, I don't know, something for special days. And I'm amazed at the innovation, plus also trends, which I especially see in Germany, and I really miss that. Non-packaged supermarket, zero waste collectors, and now we have oat milk in bottles. Yeah, so this is something everybody starts to drink, that oat milk as vegan option, better for the planet. But how about the packaging? So it's amazing, and I guess it's a huge thing. But I'm happy to see innovation sprouting and blooming in the smallest corners, in the most dirty places, next to very monofunctional generic shopping malls, and they coexist. Why not? Who was there first? I think that doesn't matter.
Wonderful. We have only a few more minutes. What other have we touched on? I think we've touched on about as much as we could this time. We've got so much more we could talk about. I love all of your concepts of the balance of talking to locals, finding out what they need, investigating new areas, new pockets of Tokyo, and researching what's happening there. Have you been interested in any other areas in your research now, or do you want to talk about?
Yeah. At the moment, I do a lot in Yokohama, Koganicho, Sakuragacho, but this is a very interesting project because we are looking at 100 years of 1923, the earthquake, huge impact on Yokohama, and now the last 20 years of creative clusters. So this is a kind of former sex area, prostitution area has been erased, cleaned up, and artists have been implanted, and that was successful. But it's a top-down thing, which I think locals have never really been happy about. So now you see that fading out, and they don't receive more money. And now the question is, Minato Mirai on that other side as that blinking harbor front, huge development, even with a High Line, and now I think a cable car. I haven't visited that cable car, which just opened, I think, 3 weeks ago. But really, really, that two futures and anyway destinies of two neighborhoods very close to just one station. Sakuragicho being the original station of that city, which has a huge impact of how Japan changed over time. So, I mean, this is like everybody's Tokyo, but that little sister, as I always call it, is a bit, there is no single book which is not just saying, covering a bit of that creative part and creative policy and creative city as, wow, this is what we have to do. No, not just that, but is that the only approach? And how do you balance the needs of people who really need that support? And people who suffer, and the locals, they suffer, and the artists, they also suffer because they're isolated. Now there is nothing really going on. So I'm conducting now my interviews, and that will be done, I think, by September. And then I'm going to publish this, I guess, end of next year then. But this is a fight of two neighbors, but being totally different. And I think this is the most contrasting or conflicting place I have been involved in that Machizukuri, and also share. I mean, there are many good things, but the city pushing that front, but forgetting the backside. So that's very close to each other. And I think these are two new areas that I've been involved now since 6-7 years. And we do rural projects. We do rural projects too. Tsuruoka will be the next one on rural creativity. We have creative industries. but we have so many more. So I think we have new projects also now in downtown Stamachi with a design workshop by a German university, which is just going to start. So, which are 2 German architects running a local gallery and practice. So I'm amazed that they are asked by the community to reform empty houses. Amazing. So local event connected us, and I think that's the kind of core young. I mean, I don't want to say that, but I already feel like being established is one thing, but I don't want to be established. I want to be inspired by new innovation and young people. So I think I also can learn from them. That's what I really search for. That curiosity is sparking new interests every time.
That's so wonderful. And Yokohama definitely is such an interesting place to study. Like you said, the old kind of red light district changing, but also you have the Chinatown area. You have the old red brick port buildings, which have been renovated into modern shops and restaurants. You have the big modern shopping center. You have the parks. Really interesting diversity of attractions and uses in the Yokohama area. I'm looking forward to your research. I loved it. Exciting.
Yeah, but this will really represent the Japanese history. I mean, they are kind of underrepresented. So that will be, I think it's a fascinating read for hopefully Japanese too.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. And I look forward to our next discussion because there is so much that we couldn't talk about today and so many more articles and books that I need to dive into. And then I'd love to invite you back again. Thank you so much, Heidi.
Thank you very much for the invitation. And I love the discussion. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Thank you for the comments. And people said it was a great discussion. Thank you from a designer in Hiroshima who was in the series. Wonderful. HAPS team, thank you so much for the awards. Great discussion. Thank you so much. Tomorrow at 5 p.m., I'm talking with Akiba, Chris Wang, about innovation in tourism and revitalization and sustainability. So please join us again tomorrow, 5 p.m. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Heidi.
Thank you. See you
Bye.
soon.